gritty.
Conflict.
I feel a sadness there.
Disgraceful.
Tragic.
Disaster.
Never again.
I mean, I can't think of anything good about it.
On February 19, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which called for the relocation and internment of all people of Japanese descent living in the United States. Not knowing how long they would be gone, they were forced to sell their homes and businesses within a matter of days. After being packed into trains and sent to one of 10 isolated relocation centers, the Japanese Americans had to adapt to the unfamiliar and grueling conditions which they would be confined to for the years to come. Their lives would be forever changed. The Grenada War Relocation Center, Amache. From the beginning of the 20th century, racial discrimination against Asian Americans was becoming more prominent.
There's laws banning intermarriage between Asians and whites. If you were, an immigrant from China or Japan, you cannot become an American citizen.
On December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese, creating an outburst of anti-Japanese sentiment in the United States.
Next day after that, you go to school and people are saying, well, you Japs did this. And of course we didn't do it.
Soon after, Executive Order 9066 was issued. More than 120,000 people of Japanese descent were forced out of their homes and sent to assembly centers. Months later, they were ordered to concentration camps throughout the nation. Many of the Japanese Americans interned at Amache came from California and endured a 3-day-long train ride to the camp.
If you have one drop of Japanese blood, you gotta go to camp. That's crazy. What would orphan kids? How can they be dangerous?
It's sickening, really. So no, I don't think the government did a very good job at all of protecting their citizens here.
It was a stab in the back. I was a legal citizen. I was loyal.
While other states resented the Japanese Americans, Colorado Governor Ralph Carr welcomed over 7,000 people to Amache, located in desolate and remote Grenada, Colorado. When the Japanese Americans arrived at Amache, the camp was not fully completed, so many internees volunteered to assist in the construction process. Living conditions at Amache were harsh. The barracks were poorly constructed and the furnishings were sparse.
All of the barracks were made out of wood frame and plywood. They're really just little wooden boxes.
Down to only about 10 below, 110 in the summer.
Each of the barracks had 6 rooms in it. The 2 on the ends were the same size. The next 2 in toward the middle were a little larger, and then there were 2 in the middle that were a different size. And then they had different sizes for different size families.
Internees did their best to try to lead normal lives at Amache. Children attended school and participated in activities such as Boy Scouts, sports, dances, and attending church. Many adults worked in the silkscreen shop, co-op, hospital, police department, and post office, among other places at Amache. Some also worked in the nearby town of Grenada. Each block had its own laundry, latrine, and mess hall for the internees to share.
There was not a lot of privacy. People were kind of living on top of each other.
At the age of 22, Jack Murrow did his best to recreate normal life through photography. He was able to dig underneath the floor and build a darkroom to develop his photographs of Amache because of the unusual design of the barracks. Aside from the unusual construction, Amache differed from other relocation centers in other areas as well.
It was very successful as an agricultural, so all of the camps were supposed to be self-sufficient, but a lot of them weren't, and Amache was.
Eventually, Japanese Americans were drafted and allowed to fight in World War II. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team was primarily composed of Japanese Americans who fought for America as a way to prove their loyalty.
A lot of them are like, look, hey, I'm an American, and this is what Americans do. So, yes, this is a country that is kind of violated my family's civil rights. They have put us behind bars, but at the same time, I'm an American.
The 442nd was a segregated unit, but they're the most highly decorated fighting group of its size.
3 years later, on October 14, 1945, after the war ended, the Japanese Americans were given a small amount of money and a train ticket and were permitted to leave the relocation center. Those who had a home to return to or had made other arrangements for a place to stay left first.
You could go back to where you came from. Well, we didn't have anything back there to go to. We had lost everything.
After leaving the camps, Japanese Americans faced an extreme amount of racial discrimination.
We were taunted as being Japanese. You might feel a little bit insecure. Your confidence has been destroyed.
During the 1940s, the rights of the Japanese Americans were stripped from them. They were forced out of their homes into concentration camps and had to adapt to an incredibly unfamiliar lifestyle. Through these actions, the government did not uphold its responsibilities to care for its citizens, their rights, and their freedoms.
Their responsibilities towards the United States never wavered, never changed. Yet, our government took their rights away.
They violated them. They trampled all over those rights.
Japanese Americans were loyal, but that didn't matter.
I couldn't believe our government would do this.
After the war ended, in order to pay debts and attempt to erase evidence of Amache and its lack of responsibility, the government sold and allowed the removal of buildings at Amache. It made no effort to preserve and remember this shameful part of our history.
I think that people wanted to pretend it didn't happen. I think and if the buildings are there, it's a lot harder to argue with the history than when they're gone.
In 1988, through the Civil Liberties Act, the government issued an official apology and gave $20,000 to all former internees.
The United States government has formally apologized to internees and given, some of them reparations based on that. That's really never enough.
Today, there are many efforts to preserve Amache, the wrongful violation of rights, and the lack of responsibility shown by the United States government. The Amache Preservation Society is a group of high school students in Grenada, Colorado, led by John Hopper. This group maintains Amache, which includes the upkeep of informational signs and the graveyard, which they recently renovated. This group also established and runs the Amache Museum, which displays artifacts from Amache that many people, including former internees, have donated. University of Denver professor Bonnie Clark runs a field school at Amache every other year to recover historical artifacts from the site. Waddell and Daub contractors are working on reconstructing and restoring buildings at Amache. Both the water tower and the guard tower were recently reconstructed. While only a few parts of the guard tower are original, the water tank is the same one that was present at Amache years ago. They are now working on establishing a barrack at Amache.
We're building this camp that was an injustice, and it's good that it's going up so that Americans can see it. But also it must bring some pain to the people who are there.
It is our responsibility to preserve Amache and this tragic part of our history.
We like to tell a triumphant story about ourselves and have a little bit harder time talking about our mistakes.
With anger against another group of people, it could happen again.
In order to prevent such a disastrous violation of rights from occurring again, it is important to remember the lack of responsibility demonstrated by the United States government. Over 7,000 Japanese Americans' lives were forever altered through their internment at Amache.
Most of the internees did not just give in to despair. There was hope there, and there was dignity. And I would like to think that we could learn something about how to not buckle under from the internees, and how to think that in a place that could be about destruction, that there can be creation.